Rama Mbacke. Rama comes from a renowned line of scholars and teachers in her family. Her great-grandfather, Sheikh Ahmad, who was the founder of the Murid Life Sufi Tariqa in Senegal, West Africa, was one of the founders of that tariqa in Senegal. Her grandfather, Sheikh Mbacke, was known as the ambassador of Islam and Muridiyya, the same tariqa, for his dedication to Islam and the Sunnah, the way of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. He traveled around the globe, promoting messages of peace and tolerance. Ustad Mbacke's father, Sheikh Mbacke, is now the head of the Sufi tariqa in Senegal. Ustad Rama herself is a hafiza, which means someone who has memorized the entire Quran by heart. And she's actually transcribed a complete copy of the Quran herself, which is an incredible feat. It's a huge, incredible book. She also learned Islamic theology, law, and Sufism throughout her teenage years before moving to LA, California in 2006. She completed her undergraduate and master's education at the California State University in Los Angeles in electrical engineering, and she now works as a nuclear engineer for Duke Energy. We are so honored to have her here today. Please help me in welcoming Ustad Rama Mbacke.
First of all, that was a great performance, and that reminds me of a verse in the Quran that said, الَّذِينَ يَتَّبِعُونَ رَسُولَ النَّبِيَّ الْأُمِّيَّ الَّذِي يَجِدُونَهُ مَكْتُوبًا عِندَهُمْ فِي التَّوْرَاةِ وَالْإِنْجِيلِ. The fact that the Prophet actually came to confirm previous messages before him. So that was a beautiful performance. Seeing together people of different religion really chanting the Prophet Muhammad. So round of applause for them, please. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وخديمه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Good evening, everyone. Greetings to everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Thank you very much, Princeton University, Office of Religious Life, Muslim Life Program. Special thanks to Imam Saeed, Archie, and everyone else. I'm extremely honored to be here tonight, extremely humbled to be here tonight. I must say though that this is my first time in New Jersey and first time in Princeton University as well, coming from California State. But it's a blessing. It truly is a blessing to be here tonight, celebrating the life of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But I'm even more honored to be here sharing the stage with Baraka. That was a beautiful, beautiful performance right there. I really enjoyed the poems that you performed right now. I was really touched. Thank you very much. You know, we have been getting a lot of attention lately, and by we, I mean Muslims and Islam. Just most recently with Charlie Hebdo in Paris, France, things happened that have been linked to Islam. But it's important that you understand that Islam does not promote violence in any way, shape, or form. Islam is a very tolerant religion, very peaceful religion. It's important to understand that. And month prior to that as well, and this is also still an ongoing situation with Boko Haram in Nigeria, kidnapping girls, depriving them of human basic rights, raping them, marrying them by force, and doing all of this stuff in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the name of Islam. in the name of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So questions have been raised, especially when it comes to Islam and women. There's a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of misconceptions. You know, we hear that a lot. Women are oppressed in Islam, that we are mistreated, that we are considered as second-class citizens in Islam. So it's really, really interesting and important as we gather to celebrate the life of the Prophet Muhammad to understand his basic teachings, the teaching of the Prophet and the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's important to go back to the teaching of him, to go back to the Quran, which is our reference, to go back to the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the Sunnah is basically what he had said, or what he had done, or what he had witnessed being done, and he didn't disapprove. That's what the Sunnah is. So it's important as Muslims to go back to those teachings. It's extremely important. And as we know, women have been marginalized in society, and even prior to Islam, and we know that, right? Even nowadays, in modern society, in the 21st century, we hear that a lot, right? They have been mistreated even prior to Islam, in pre-Islamic culture. They have been marginalized in society. Even then, new baby girls were buried alive. They were considered as people that did not have any soul, that did not have any reason to live at the time. And the Prophet Muhammad came to change that world. The status of women literally changed when Islam came, drastically changed and improved when Islam came. And it started with the universality of the message of the Prophet ﷺ. قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ إِنِّي رَسُولُ اللَّهِ إِلَيْكُمْ جَمِيعًا الَّذِي لَهُ مُلْكُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا هُوَ يُحْيِي وَيُمِيتُ فَآمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ النَّبِيِّ الْأُمِّيِّ الَّذِي يُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ وَكَلِمَاتِهِ وَاتَّبِعُوهُ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَهْتَدُونَ. That's the universality of the message of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. He did not just come for one community. He did not just come for one particular race of people. He did not come for one particular culture, but he came for entire humanity, for entire mankind. And as one of the president of MSA, I believe, I can't remember his name, but as he was saying about the merciful, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَىٰ رَحْمَةٍ لِلْعَالَمِينَ, he came as a mercy to mankind. So the Prophet Muhammad was somebody, a human being really. I mean, I'm not just talking about the spirituality part of it, but as a humanness, he was an example of human conduct. I mean, you and I, we are ordinary people, but he wasn't. But it was important for him to adopt to us, to have those moral characters. And we hear that sometimes too. وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَىٰ خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. He was a human being of great, great, great moral character. He was a role model, so he embodied those qualities, and that's why we're able to follow him. And he even said, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. I came, Allah has sent me to perfect noble characters. And even before he was commissioned to be the messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even before he was sent as the messenger of Allah, he was known as the Sadiq, the truthful, and Al-Amin, the most trustworthy. That was the Prophet Muhammad. And that's the reason why he was who he was. Because he embodied the knowledge of Shisa, Prophet Shisa, the asceticism of Prophet Isa ibn Maryam, the gratification of Prophet Isaac, the force of Prophet Musa, the eloquence of Prophet Salih, the courage of Noah, and that's the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was also a modest and humble human being, and a very respectful human being. In Allah ya'muru bil 'adli. So he came to restore a society that was broken. He came to restore an honorable society at the time. So there are two symbolic events that happen in Islam, and we talk about it sometimes. The first Muslim was a woman, that was Khadija. And the first revelation also came in the presence of Khadija. When Angel Gabriel came to deliver the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it was in the presence of Khadija. She was the one comforting the Prophet Muhammad because of what he had saw in Jibril. And also, towards the end also, when the Prophet Muhammad was departing from this world, was passing away, he was also in the presence of Aisha. He was laying on her lap. So we can see here the beginning of Islam from the very beginning to the end, sort of the end, when end of an era actually with the Prophet. We can see here how women have been there, they have been present in there. And one of the last recommendations of the Prophet Muhammad was to be mindful of prayers, of course, to be mindful of salat as one of our obligations, but for men also to take care of women. That's how respectful the Prophet Muhammad was. That's how honorable he was. And so the Prophet came to abolish all the unjust laws that denoted women as inferior in quality in nature. Not only did Islam protect women, but also gave her roles and responsibilities to play in society. Islam and the Prophet Muhammad gave women equality in religious obligations, in social responsibilities, in education, in cultivation and rewards also, but obligations that are commensurate to her abilities. There are 6,000 or more verses in the Quran that address both men and women equally, but according to their specific needs. That's very important, according to their specific needs. So, in a society where women were considered as nothing, as people that did not have any soul, the Prophet came to actually change that. And he said in the Quran, Ya ayyuhan nas inna khalaqnakum min zakarin wa unsa. We were created from one single source. And we see that also throughout the Quran. إن المسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات والخانتين والخانتات والصالحين والصالحات, talking about the great qualities of human beings, period. The truthful, the believers, the obedient men and women. All of these people have been, Allah has prepared forgiveness and great rewards. من عمل صالحا من ذكر أو أنثى وهو مؤمن فلنحيينه حياة الدنيا. Whoever does righteousness, whether you are a male or a female, Allah has prepared a great life. So we see how here the status of women has changed drastically from people that were not even considered as nothing in a society, and actually being included in the Quran and that. And society right now, we hear this version of equality. This is a question that comes up a lot. Would our men equal the men, etc., women and men? But I feel like Islam has already answered that question, because men and women, we complement each other. It's kind of sort of like this binary system of life. For those of you who may be computer scientists or whatnot, 1 and 0, positive and negative, or good and bad, or day and night. Each one of us has own particularity, but we are part of this one system. We contribute to this one system, and that's very important. And the Prophet Muhammad said, إِنَّمَا نِسَاءُ شَقَائِقُ الرِّجَالِ, that we, men and women, we complement each other. وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْضٍ يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ. That men and women, we are allies of each other. We pray together, we zakat together, we build societies together. And the Prophet Muhammad demonstrated that basically. And Aisha, his wife, testified that the Prophet Muhammad never raised his hand towards any other woman. And he said also, وَإِنَّكَ لِزَوْجِكَ عَلَيْكَ حَقًّا, talking about how women have rights and to treat them right as well. So the Prophet Muhammad honored and respected women on all social levels, whether you are a mother, whether you are a daughter or a sister. So we've seen women also throughout Islamic culture at the time as well, praying behind the Prophet Muhammad. We've seen them as teachers, seen them fighting in battlefields, and we've seen them being celebrated as mothers as well. In the Quran, There's a verse that says, وَخَدَّى رَبُّكَ لَا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ بِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Worship Allah and obey your parents. Provide good treatment. Be kind to your parents. And one time, this one man came to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and asked him, who should I worship more between his parents? And the Prophet said, your mother. And he asked, who else? The Prophet Muhammad confirmed it again and said, your mother. And he asked after that, who? And the Prophet Muhammad said, your mother. So he said it 3 times. And then he said, your father. So this is actually a very important statement in talking about the importance of this and the status of mother. How many mothers do we have here actually tonight? Thank you. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said also that paradise lies at your mother's feet. And mothers are women, of course, right? So we understand how he respected and honored women also. As a wife, the Prophet Muhammad said that the best among you are those who treat your wives the best. So Islam sort of ordered men to be gentle towards women and care for their feelings. And also in different responsibilities, not just as a mother or as a wife or as a daughter, but in different responsibilities as well. Talking about, for instance, knowledge or education. Because sometimes we hear that women are not allowed to get education, women are not allowed to go and seek knowledge, etc. But there's a verse in the Quran that said, وَاسْكُنَّ مَا يَتْلَى فِي بُيُوتِكُنَّ مِنْ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ وَالْحِكْمَةِ. Pass down the knowledge that you possess. Pass down the knowledge that you possess. I mean, if that's a role and that's a responsibility that the Quran is giving us, it's a responsibility. You cannot pass down anything, any type of knowledge if you don't know it. And the Prophet also came to confirm that as well. When he said, that it was mandatory for every Muslim to seek knowledge, regardless whether you're a man or a woman. At one time, at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, a group of women actually came and complained to the Prophet that they were not necessarily involved in the religious knowledge seeking at the time. So they came to complain to him that they wanted to participate more, that they wanted to learn more. And the Prophet told them, "Ijtami'na fi yawmi kadha wa kadha," meaning pick a date out of the week for me to come and teach you. This is the Prophet that we're talking about. This is the message of Allah that we're talking about. So it's very important that we understand how the Prophet was very encouraging. And we've seen that also with examples in different women throughout history, Islamic history as well. For instance, Shifa bint Abdullah. She was very skilled in what we call ruqya, so that's healing. In modern time, we probably would say that that's medicine, really. So when she embraced Islam, she came to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to ask permission whether or not she should continue, or whether or not she should modify what she was doing or stop it completely. So not only the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ asked her to continue what she was doing, but also encouraged her and asked her to give lessons to his wife, Hafsa. And she was very skilled, Shifa bint Abdullah, she was very skilled in writing, the art of writing as well at the time. And the Prophet asked her and suggested her to also teach his wife, Hafsa. So she was also appointed as an officer in the administration at the marketplace at the time by Umar, the second Khalif of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Also Asma, the daughter of Abu Bakr, she was a great poet as well. And the oldest university to date is in Morocco. It was built and founded by Fatima al-Fihri. It's Al-Kharwi. If you go to Morocco, visit Morocco one time, you would actually see it. So it was founded by a woman named Fatima. Aisha, she was called Nisful Ilm, basically. She was called as 50% of the knowledge of Islam. Pretty much most of the hadith that we hear were reported by Aisha. She was a great scholar, a very great scholar. And she was also a leader in her own right. She taught over 299 men at the time and over 67 women as well. Salama also was a wife of the Prophet Muhammad who taught over 101 men and 23 women as well. So these were leaders at the time of the Prophets. And this is what the Prophet Muhammad taught us really, to have leadership, to be knowledgeable, to be scholar, to have scholarship actually, if you will. And we cannot forget Khadija as well, the wife of the Prophet Muhammad, who was a businesswoman, who participated in conflict management, who participated in public affairs, in social services as well. So these are great examples, really. These are the teaching, these are the basic teaching of the Quran, the teaching of the Prophet Muhammad. So now let me ask you this question. Why have we adopted, or why do we seem like we have adopted so many Islamic cultures and habits that we tend to confuse these with the true teaching of Islam? Why do we have so many questions? Why do we have so many misunderstandings? And I think the answer to that is that we, as Muslims really, we must reflect back to what the Prophet did, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We must try to emulate his fairness. We must try to emulate his respect, his justness toward human beings. Not just men or women, but human beings, period. We all are them as human beings. So I hope that tonight we learn something about the Prophet Muhammad that he was a human being that honored human beings, period. So we have to emulate that and have that character that he had in us. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Our next guest speaker is Sokhna Rama Mbacke. She is a scholar and an international ambassador of the Murid Sufi order. Born in Senegal, she is the great-granddaughter of the renowned West African spiritual master Sheikh Mbacke, founder of the Murid Brotherhood. She is also the eldest daughter of Sheikh Mbacke, the current spiritual leader of the global Murid Sufi order. She's from a family of scholars who have made education in the Islamic sciences a top priority, overseeing 400 schools dedicated to Islamic spirituality and religious practice. Ms. Mbacke is also the product of this tradition. She was born out of it, having studied in the blessed city of Touba, Senegal, where she memorized the Quran and wrote an entire copy of it from memory. She has studied many Islamic sciences, such as Islamic theology, Tawheed, Islamic jurisprudence, fiqh, Sufism, Tasawwuf, and a myriad of complementary sciences. After completing her Islamic education, she moved to Los Angeles, where she attended California State University, receiving her undergraduate and graduate degrees in electrical engineering. She continues to travel widely as a spiritual ambassador and Islamic educator, in addition to working as a nuclear engineer for Duke University in North Carolina, where she currently resides. Please help me welcome Sokhna Rama Mbacke.
Thank you very much, Brother Tahir, for that kind introduction. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وخدمه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Greetings to everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Thank you very much Life for inviting me here tonight. This is such an honor. I'm extremely humbled to be here tonight. This is actually my first time in Chicago, Illinois, and one of the few times that I have experienced this amount of cold that's outside. And my sister here, who came from Los Angeles, she could not even feel her ears actually because of the cold. But it's a blessing. It truly is a blessing to be here tonight, celebrating the life of my beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'm even more humbled actually to be speaking after Professor Hisham Mahmoud. He probably laughed, but he's a great knowledge. He has a great knowledge, actual amount of knowledge, and a professor of such high caliber, and I'm still sort of a learner myself, so I'm extremely humbled. So this is a great opportunity actually for celebrating the life of the Prophet through Murid Life. As it's an opportunity for all of us to discuss the greatness of the Prophet Muhammad, to talk about some of the school of thoughts across the board, across the world actually, especially in West Africa. The Prophet Muhammad is such an ocean of treasure, really. He was a great human being. It's not really random that we come from different backgrounds, that we come from different communities, that we speak different languages, that we come from different ethnicities, that we come from different backgrounds, cultural backgrounds as well. That's the work of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's where the message of the Prophet Muhammad comes in. It's a unifying message. His message actually came to confirm previous revelations. All the way to the end of the verse, but I'll stop there for Torah and Injil to point out the fact that his message really literally came to complete the message of previous prophets. Peace be upon all of them. So the Prophet Muhammad did not just come for one community. He did not come for one particular race of people. He came for humanity. قل يا أيها الناس إني رسول الله إليكم جميعا. That's what the Quran said. له ملك السماوات والأرض لا إله إلا هو يحيي ويميت فآمنوا بالله ورسوله النبي الأمي الذي يؤمن بالله وكلماته واتبعوا الله لعلكم تهتدون. That's the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the universality of the message of the Prophet. So that's how great the Prophet Muhammad was, and that's the reason why he was actually chosen to be who he was, because he possessed some of the greatest qualities of previous prophets as well. He had the courage of Nuh, the knowledge of Shisa, Prophet Shisa, the eloquence of Prophet Salih, the asceticism of Prophet Isa ibn Maryam, Jesus, the obedience of Dawood, the closeness to God of Abraham, the force of Moses, and that's why he was the greatest of all greats. That's why he was the last messenger of Allah. See, the Prophet Muhammad was a human being. I mean, I'm not just talking about the spirituality part of it, but he was an example of human conduct, really. He was not an ordinary human being. We are ordinary people. And so we'd like to see an example of that. That's why he said, so he was a human being of great moral character. That's why he was able to handle the responsibilities that was actually given to him. I came to perfect noble characters. Even before he was sent as a messenger of Allah, even before he was a prophet of Muhammad that he was known as Muhammad al-Sadiq and al-Amin, the truthful and the trustworthy in Mecca. His kindness was legendary. His tolerance was also legendary. We see that in the Quran, designating people that we don't necessarily share the same belief system with him. He was merciful. He was sent as a mercy to human beings. And there's a lot of examples in that actually. We have, for instance, we are required to pray 5 times a day, but it used to be actually 50 times a day. And it was because of the mercy of the Prophet asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala what he can do for humanity to ease our lives, really. There's an example also for when he was praying actually and reciting one verse and hearing in the back the cry of a baby. and he shortened the length of the verse that he was reciting. And when they asked him why he did that, he said, it's because the cry of a baby indicates that his mother actually needs him. That's how tender-hearted the Prophet Muhammad was. His patience characterized pretty much his entire life. And his patience was tested when he lost all his children except Fatima. When he lost Khadija, his first wife, during his entire lifetime. He was a respectful human being, a fair human being. He was a humble human being, a modest one. He used to walk behind his companions, really. That's a sign of modesty, even with his status being the prophet that he was. He did not want to distinguish himself from his companions, from his sahabas. We could go on and on and on about the greatness of the prophet. And these are examples, actually, of how we should behave. Because Islam is not just about praying 5 times a day. It's not just about the going to Mbacke. It's not just about the fasting. It's not just about the rituals, really. It's about also having great moral character, really. Because we remember the story when Angel Gabriel came to the Prophet and talking about, the principles of Islam. And he started asking him, what are the 3 principles of Islam? What is Iman, for instance? And the Prophet answered, it's Tawheed. It's basically to believe in God, to believe in the prophets, to believe in the Quran, the last day of judgment, etc., etc. And he asked him, what's Islam? So Islam is the practice, basically, is the fiqh part of it. That's the believing practicing the 5 pillars of Islam. Praying, fasting, going to Mbacke, doing the zakat at the end of the year, 2.5%, etc. And he asked him, what is ihsan? And this is the part that we don't necessarily hear a lot about. And this is also related to the characters. And he said, worship Allah as if you are seeing Him, as if you feel His presence. That's what ihsan is. And for those of you who probably have heard of Sufism, Tasawwuf is basically based on ihsan. So essentially, ihsan is Tasawwuf, or Sufism is to ihsan what Iman is to theologist, and what Islam is to the jurist. That's what Tasawwuf is. So Tasawwuf, Sufism, is literally based on ihsan, understanding of the divine. The spiritual purification of your heart, having that inner heart devoted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I mean, how many of us here would do things differently, by show of hands, if no one is watching? Right. So that's exactly how ihsan is, to be able to perfect the way you practice, to be able to beautify the way you practice. And Tasawwuf, Sufism, actually started at the time of the Prophet. And we've heard of Ahlul Sufi, or 70 people, or 75 people at the time of the Prophet that used to sit in front of the mosque of the Prophet, searching for the inner path. And so when people had questions, for instance, or they wanted prayers, the Prophet would send them to those Ahlul Sufi, those 70 people that dedicated their entire life to worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because at the time of the Prophet, worshiping Allah was easy, because he was here. You could go and ask him questions. He was perfect also, he was intense. But when he left, physically, when he was no longer with us, that's when things values started to kind of go back to what it was before he was here. And so people like Imam Junayd or Al-Hasan al-Basri, that's when they started to wanting to go back to that authentication of Islam, to that intensification of it, going back to that orthodox Islam. So that's when they came together to start Sufism. I mean, I don't want to say it was a doctrine, but it really kind of isn't. Because if you say it's a doctrine, people start thinking that it's an innovation in Islam, but it really isn't. It's part of it. It's part of the ihsan, the principles of it. So really what Sufism is about is the understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's the purification of your heart. Worshiping Allah as if you are seeing Him, beautifying the way you practice, and having great moral characters. So it's that intensification of it. That's what Tasawwuf is. That's what Sufism is all about. And Sufism really started spreading around the world, actually, and especially in West Africa, some parts of West Africa. especially in Senegal, because the interesting part about Islam in West Africa, or particularly in Senegal, is that it started at the 7th century, really. So it's not anything new in there, but the reality was that people also started going back to their traditional beliefs, because they were Muslims, yes. But the thing was, they also started going back to the way they used to practice before. I mean, before, they used to believe in idols, for instance, status, in idols and polytheism, etc., and different gods. And so they started mixing that up with the way they practice Islam in West Africa. And going back to what the Prophet Muhammad said, that undoubtedly Allah, what he said was, in Allah, basically every century, the men of God will be sent. It's not going to be the Prophet, because the Prophet Muhammad is the last messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But every century, men of God will be sent to revive Islam, to make people go back to the authentic self of Islam. So there was a lot of great figures in West Africa. We were blessed to have a lot of great figures, and Sheikh Mbacke was one of them. He was one of the Murid. He was a blessed human being, and he was somebody that understood the Quran, who loved the Prophet Muhammad, who literally devoted his entire life to the Prophet. So Sheikh Mbacke started having followers and people listening to him, because he started teaching the essence of the Prophet. He started reminding people the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, for people to actually give up on their traditional beliefs. And so that's why Sheikh Mbacke started having followers and people listening to him, and he grew like a community. And also he founded Murid, based on the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad and the teachings of the Quran. And at the time, the interesting part about Senegal also was that we had colonization in there, French colonization, for those of you who may be familiar with that, who may have heard of it as well. They occupied Senegal, really. And so they wanted people to give up on their freedom, and their religious freedom, on their cultural identities. They occupied Senegal in its entirety. And Sheikh Mbacke was against that. He wanted people to maintain their cultural identity while being the best Muslims that they could be. So the French accused him of wanting to start a jihad. So they wrote him a letter telling him that you have to give up on your mission of teaching people. You have to give up on that. And started accusing him of wanting to do the jihad. And he wrote him a letter back and he said, yes, I am doing the jihad. Yes, I am doing the jihad. But my jihad is not based on violence. My jihad is not based on killing. My jihad is not based on anything that's against the teaching of the Prophet. My jihad is based on knowledge and worshiping of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But nonetheless, they still took him away for 33 years under arrest. They first sent him for 7 years in Gabon. He was in the wilderness, torturing him, wanting to assassinate him, wanting to eliminate him, really. But he did not give up in his mission. So even when they sent him back to Senegal, he was still under arrest. They wanted people to really, really forget about him and his teaching, but he stayed true to his mission, to loving the Prophet. So he called himself actually Khadim Rasul, the servant of the Prophet Muhammad. So he dedicated his entire life praising on the Prophet Muhammad, praying on him, and loving him, and showing also people how to love the Prophet Muhammad. So he said in one of his writings, he divided the entire year into 2 parts. The first 6 months he would focus entirely on praying on the Prophet Muhammad. The second part he would actually praise on him. So he would write qasaids, dedicating poems, dedicating them to the Prophet Muhammad. He also said, I would give him all the material things in the world to actually see the Prophet Muhammad. He said,
I cannot even find enough love in my heart because of the love I have for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Shifa'u jismi wa shifa'u qalbi Muhammad. If I feel sick, just thinking about the Prophet actually heals me. That's etc. etc. So that's how he loved the Prophet Muhammad, and that's how he showed us how to love the Prophet Muhammad in West Africa, in Senegal particularly. And we can see that in every aspect, actually, culturally, politically. Speaking of politically, Senegal is one of probably the most stable countries in West Africa, with over 95% Muslim. The first president was actually a Christian. That's how tolerant people are here. Culturally speaking as well, or even economically speaking, Sheikh Ahmed Bamba created Touba as a city where people could actually worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala independently. And so the city of Touba was a village. It was a village actually with probably 2 houses in it. But right now, less than 50 years, it became the second largest city in Senegal. And everything in there is basically self-sufficient. I mean, Murids are self-sufficient. The hospitals, the schools, the roads, it was the Murid that actually built it. It was not the government at all. So that's based on the great moral characters that teaches self-sufficiency as well. To not be depending on anybody else. To just depend on God subhanahu wa ta'ala and loving the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's the influence really that Sheikh Ahmed Bamba had on all of us. And that's the love of the Prophet that we have to maintain. Loving the Prophet and worshiping Allah in its entirety. And I believe that's how the light of the Prophet is actually going to shine upon all of us, loving him. Thank you very much.